Detroit is Different is where you get information, artistry, history, music, and even comedy. Detroit is Different, a home for the culture of Detroit. Visit online at DetroitisDifferent.com today.
All right, we are back in full effect in the Detroit is Different podcast studios, and this is a special interview. I know I say it often. I know people listening to this probably like, it seems like every interview is special. Well, guess what? Every interview is special. This is Detroit is Different. I'm offering the culture of Detroit, probably people you may have seen, maybe people you unaware with, but I'm giving you a different style of interview. This, if I must say, I think I'm getting better at this whole interviewing thing. I'm like becoming a Detroit Mike Wallace. Or I forget the whatever the black dude on 60 Minutes back in the day was.
Mike Wallace.
All right, so with it, I got my comrade in here, as he would say, but my homie, brother in arms. I've been working with Yusef for a long time, and if people know me, Yusef is definitely somebody where we've partnered with, but many people may not know it. Yusef Shakur, how you feeling?
Feeling good brother. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Well, it's been a long time in the making, as I've been doing Detroit is Different for some years now, and I featured you early on. You've been a part of certain segments. We recently did this discussion on community development where you spoke, but a lot of people are still kind of unaware of the relationship and our friendship that we share,
right.
which we'll talk a little bit about later in the interview, but that's my man's right there. So, like, you really almost would have to, you would have to come with so much evidence and information or anything to come between the bond that me and Yusef got, because even when we disagree, we still agree, because that's my brother in arms. So this always begins with your family's journey to Detroit. How far back are your roots to the city of Detroit in family?
So on my mother's side, I'm a third generation. Well, actually, my grandmother's side, I am a fourth generation. My grandmother's from Alabama. And she was raised in Detroit, and my grandfather, he was from Georgia, and he relocated to Detroit.
Okay, all right. So Georgia, where about in Georgia?
It's a small little city. It starts with S, and it's not Savannah. It's similar to Savannah. And then my father's parents.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a third generation on that side as well. And both of them are from Mississippi.
Okay. Whereabouts Mississippi?
Bayou.
Okay.
Yeah.
You ever been down there?
I've been down there since as an adult, and I went when I was a little kid, but I was so young
That you didn't remember.
Right. So I went down there for Nation Day a couple years ago.
Okay. All right. So your connection. What was it that your family did when they made their way about to Detroit?
I mean, the most I know is particularly my grandfather, similar to a lot of our stories or our travel to Detroit, was through the factories and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother, she raised herself up through working and cleaning white people houses, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
So my grandfather, my father's father, he was a mechanic.
Okay.
So,
All right, and your whole story, picking up kind of with your life about your relationship between both your parents, is in your autobiography that has national acclaim. Right My Wrongs. It's what release is it on now?
Oh, well, it's the Window to My Soul. So
Window to My Soul. Window to My Soul.
So we on the fifth edition of it and things. So now we about to reproduce reproducing my documentary, Redemption Road, will be coming out in 2021.
All right, so Window to My Soul, I read it back in 2007 because you were listening to my album, and it's very personal. It's like a real personal piece. Talks a whole lot about your upbringing and also your family dynamic between your father and your mother. How long did it take you to write the autobiography, and when did you start writing it?
So it took me about 6 or 7 months. And the funny story was, like, I knew I wanted to write the book. And, and a lot of us want to write a book. A lot of us want to do an album, do different things, but we procrastinate. And then It was this particular author who was in the genre around urban lit. That was her thing. Actually, she grew up off Linwood, whatnot. So every time I see her, like, I'm gonna write my book. I'm gonna write my book. Until one point, she was like, "Negro, when you gonna write this book? You keep telling me about it." And that was the fire that I needed. And I just sat down and I knocked it out. And then I wrote my second one. Actually, it took me less than 90 days to write my second one.
Okay. What was the process going into writing your book?
For me, I'm an old school guy. So like as a rapper, or whatever, I like people talk about Jay and Biggie, how like they get in the booth and want to go off the top of their head. Like for me as a writer, I type later, but I need to write it down. I just need to get it out off of me, whether it don't make sense. It can be the words can be all over the place. I just need to see it, and then from there it helps me transition to like fixing it up. That's my process.
And in the book, now we're going back to some of your childhood. You talk what I starkly remember as I'm fumbling on the title. What I do remember is a lot of your relationship with your mother, and how tough that was, and also your strained relationship with your father. You go in depth about that, and you remember it so vividly, and really connecting through a young age to your teenage years. In that, it was like, man, this guy is telling this story of kind of what decisions your mom was making, to the point where your mom was feeling like you were just so overwhelming as a child. The impact of the passing of your grandfather, and then that relationship you had with your grandfather as like a semblance of a mentor and also a friend, and even the role he played in your mom's life. And then also just those very few interactions with your father that were so impactful at a young age, but they still were impactful.
Right.
All of this stuff I remember, and I read it back then. So I read it back in 2007. So I remember so much of your childhood, and then that even connecting to your journey, where you were incarcerated. And then the events that led up to that, you even feeling like, man, I didn't necessarily do what this was, but I understood the tone and the circumstance how I ended up in this situation.
Right.
And even rationalizing and normalizing it at the time. It was deep. It was impactful. Like, the only thing close to it I can think of is the Autobiography of Malcolm X. And capturing that story, you're telling me you just sat down and just wrote it?
Oh yeah, most definitely. So it's something I say. While in prison, I read with a purpose, and reading with a purpose inspired me to write with a purpose. The greatest influence that I had in my life up to that point was books. Books that helped shape me, helped me redefine who I am. So the contribution that I could give back to the world was to write a book, because that is the foundation. And so as you was talking, the first thing that came to my mind was, because most, again, as an artist or a writer or whatnot, we're influenced by the world, whether we want to admit it or not. And so fundamentally, my influence on the type of book I wanted to write was the Autobiography of Malcolm X, along with the Autobiography of H. Rap Brown, Die Nigga Die. And both of those two books was like very instrumental from a very authentic way, from a very like how we grew up in Detroit, 12, Dexter, Linwood, Zone 8. First thing we say, nigga, we gonna keep it real, right? And I mean that is the mantra that we basically we are fed from the time we come into the hood or whatnot, into the time we unfortunately of our demise. And so, but for me in writing this, I wanted to keep it vulnerable. It was because it's the vulnerability in Malcolm's book that captivates you. It's the willingness to take you in those dark rooms. It's the willingness to expose the dynamics around his mother, his father, and all those things. And so because at the end of the day, like when you're writing as an artist, there's no one in the room with you as a writer, right? So that's what they say. Integrity is not what you do in front of other people. It's what you do when it's just you and yourself. So as a writer, if you went back in the penitentiary and you ran, or the guys who came home, they will say, well, this is true. Like most guys who come out of that situation, you have the ability to exaggerate and whatnot. And so for me, as a writer, I'm also thinking about what I would want to read. You know, how it would impact people. So when they sat down and read it, like even my homies in my neighborhood, whether they agreed or not, they could respect it because I honored them. I honored it in a way that it spoke from a very authentic space.
Yeah, I mean, so authentic to the point of the way you spoke of that vulnerability can be so small. Like you would talk about like trips to McDonald's with your granddad,
Right.
which is so common. Instead of making it seem like, yeah, you know, my granddad took us to 5-star dinners or something like that. You spoke of the whole incident. It's a big incident in your life of an incident at a church.
Right.
And just the way the lawlessness, like a shooting at a church and thugs in a church. But the way you wrote about it was in a way, in a tone where it's like, wow, you still feel as though it's a teenager talking to you that's overwhelmed with what could happen, but also in a feeling of I have to kind of walk this line because I don't know what would happen if I back down from this.
Right. So you said earlier, you used the J word, journey.
Yeah.
So for me as a writer or a speaker, I try to take people on a journey, like because I've been on a journey, I'm still on a journey of redemption, a journey of transformation, a journey of becoming a better father, a better man. And sometimes what we want to do is start people where we at now and where we don't want to take the people back. So again, in the way I wrote my book and write many things, I intersect all of my life. You know, I intersect the streets, I intersect the intellect, I intersect the organizer, the revolutionary. So like my name is Yusef, but I don't. When you read the book, I don't start talking about me as Yusef Shakur until I get to that transformation part. So I don't want to confuse the reader. Like so when you get to that destination, you understand how do I got there. Sometimes we take people end up there and you read like how did he become Yusef?
Yeah.
Because ultimately we're all trying to become something else, something better, you know, a better version of who we are. And so as a speaker, right, the best speaker is not the people that has a very prolific language or to say prolific things, but the one that can relate to an audience, so the audience can leave feeling empowered and equipped and sing. Because ultimately people as speakers, and you're speaking to an audience, they just want to be reaffirmed. We know we're all smart. They just want to have somebody in front of them and say like what you're thinking is right. Because the country that we live in is how we're conditioned to look for some type of messiah or some great persona person that can affirm within us that our humanity matters.
So humanity matters. Into your actual story. What was it? What was your mom going through? Where was she working? It was you and your sister. What was that experience like as a kid? What do you remember about that household?
It was a lot. I mean, my mother was a young mother. It was a lot of physical abuse. There was a lot of moving around. Her trying to, create her identity. Being a mother. Raising 3 kids, and then she, was had the shadow of the social stigma. Having 3 kids from 3 different fathers. So you had all these dynamics that's interacting or intersecting in how we live. I mean, she's struggling economically because she's job to job, and then she's supplementing work with men in the streets. She hustling in the streets, and you're doing what you got to do to take care of your kids. My mother was a very beautiful woman. Very young, so she was very attractive. So men preyed on her and whatnot. So it was a lot going on, and my mother, even though men preyed on her, she wasn't a punk.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't there, but there's a story of a guy that she used to date. He used to like to put his hands on her, and one day he came home, she shot his ass with a shotgun.
Hmm.
So you have all these things. So again, just like it's interesting. Like you asked this question, if I had to describe my mother, my mother was the most gangster thing that I knew.
And even to this day, and I ask you that because in a lot of your works, as what you have with your center for what you're doing in your neighborhood home, that is a resource for the community, and
Right.
you do the back to school backpack drive, back to school supply drive, and you've been doing it for years now. Is right there in your mom's backyard. But anybody that knows that neighborhood,
My mama.
your mom is also like a community resource itself for so many people.
Right.
Like to the point where, I've driven down that street just going to Northwestern, going to the track, or looking for you, or just coming up, and your mom's transition from learning and balancing life just to become an adult, to working, to now being what people would label as a community activist.
Right.
It's natural for people like your mom.
Right.
Like, I don't even think she would label herself as a community activist. She'd be like, I've known him for forever, and he plays a role. He's a part of our community. She's a part of our community. We're gonna get him a plate of food. We're gonna have him sweep up the street. We're gonna have them take out the garbage. Like, she's intricate in everything that happens on the block.
Correct. And when you frame it that way, and it's interesting too, because in the retyping of the documentary, I said something similar. Like my mother's an activist without the title.
Yeah.
And when you look at the life of black bodies and black people, we've always had. That was a norm in our neighborhoods. That was a norm in our community. That was a norm of being black. Nowadays people are putting on activist clothes versus like this is just who you are. Like people are taking it off and putting it back on and whatnot, and that's where there's a level of phoniness that comes with that versus again like you're not trying to be an activist. You're just trying to be the best version of yourself of interacting. Because I may not be able to say, well, this is white supremacy or this capitalism. All the nuances of the dynamics of language and whatnot. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I want to help somebody because I might be in that situation because fundamentally. Being the central piece in that community, like my mother's house is the only house on the block, so she you can't help but to notice her, right? And she's involved on every level in some way, in some fashion in our communities. Some people like may turn up their nose and blah blah blah, but to be in the community and of the community, you have to be part of every aspect of the community. That was like the glue to our relationship. Like most people would think like we shouldn't be friends or we shouldn't be cool. We come from two different life experience.
Mm-hmm.
There's an age different, but our commonality is our communities are so much similar,
Mm-hmm.
right? And our depth of understanding the dynamics of our community is a shared passion, a shared love, a shared commonality that has cemented our bond.
And that's what I also find so cool about the relationship with your mother and the role she plays. Like, I remember it was 2 summers ago at the Ace Hardware store, because in the neighborhood you go to Ace Hardware store, not Home Depot.
Right.
Your mom was like buying like 5 brooms or something.
Right.
And she was like, these people need brooms. Your mom like poked me. She was like, what you doing over here? I was like, I live down the street.
Right.
She was like, they don't have them over at my store, so I'm over here and I got to get some paint. And I'm thinking to myself, like, why is your mom spending, you know what I'm saying, as old as your mom is and everything. It's like, why is she buying paint for other people and brooms and stuff? But I'm like, this is what Yusef Moms does. And a lot of this is kind of like in the work of some of the things that Yusef does right now.
Right. So, and it has shaped me and influences me. Again, I could tell you about all the books I've read. I could tell you about all, people I've met who've been doing this in a certain way. But I mean, at the end of the day, my mother is instrumental in how I do my community work. Fundamentally.
Yeah, and your mom also, knows some of the preachers over there, some of the politicians that have been over there, a lot of the gangsters that's been over there, and on all levels is a part of that community.
Yeah, I mean, then anybody who's come to the backpack event, who's come on the block where we do our basic organizing. My mother is a colorful person.
Yeah.
What I mean by that, I mean she's just who she is. I mean she's not gonna fake it. I remember one time at one of the backpack events that we cook, right? We cook right there at the field. We got the grill going on. And the guy was like, he wanted on the hot sauce. She's like, "Is it done yet?" She broke the mug open and bit on it like it ain't done yet.
Hilarious.
Right, exactly. It's like the big mama. It's if my mama remind you of your mama or your auntie, it's that connection that personalized in a way that it makes us feel like a family.
So, in growing, you became a founding member of the gang Zone 8 too. Right there, 48208. If you're familiar with the community, I'm a Northwestern graduate, so people know Zone 8 and Northwestern go hand in hand as they're interconnected. You see a Z, an 8, and an N and an E, and you think to yourself, oh, man, I don't want to be over here.
Right.
So this form of camaraderie and community, but from a different lens of young men that are a lot older to you at a younger age, but really just as young as yourself. How did this connection build? What was the spark for that?
I mean, just like growing up in my neighborhood, my neighborhood shaped me, the good, the bad, and the indifferent. So, and I relate my neighborhood to if I was in Africa, growing up in Ghana, growing up in Tanzania, South Africa, and that's my nation, that's my land, that's everything to me, and my neighborhood is the same in the same vein. So, when people talk about like being a founding member of Zone 8, like Zone 8 it already existed as a name, as a neighborhood. We just took it we just developed another aspect of it, which was the gang part. And the funny thing wasn't like we recruited each other. It socially happened because of certain social factors within the neighborhood. But overstanding through my transformation and my redemption, there's a social obligation. Again, I mean, there's millions of men and women who go to prison, millions and thousands of us who say we changed, whatever, but rarely do many of us come back and root ourselves back in our neighborhoods. And some of us for good reasons, some of us for wrong reasons, and some of us can't do that type of work because it's just too overwhelming. It's too traumatizing. And it's overwhelming for me currently. It's traumatizing on many levels, but also you can't heal what you won't confront. You can't be a true example for someone if you're not there in front of them. And so I do that because when I think about my life, when I look at my son, my oldest son, I look at his generation of Zone 8s and kids and whatnot, and what they went through, and the absence of fatherhood and motherhood, and the influx of drugs and violence at the level that they seen, that they was like born into trauma.
Yeah,
like we all was, but their trauma was a lot different than our trauma, in the sense of like their lives was predetermined to be Zone 8. Where for me, again, it happened in happenstance. And so like it wasn't, they didn't have no choice but to be a Zone 8. And so for me, I feel an obligation to interact with them and to not condemn them, love them, but challenge them, to hold them accountable, but push them to think and look differently. Because at the end of the day, when you see the drug dealer, but then I see Yusef too.
Yeah.
For every 10 drug dealers, they see a Yusef now. Who has just as much power, who has just as much an influence as these 10 drug dealers, without the drugs, without the drug money.
And without the drug money, you bring one of the largest events, like I say, to your mom's backyard.
Right.
That started as an event right there in your mom's backyard, and now it stretches, takes over the block, takes over a couple blocks. It's received national attention, a lot of media. You create a reality for young people in that community to see, wow, like right here on this street, something big is happening. What sparked that?
I mean, the revolutionary me sparked that, being able to want to create programs. I mean, fundamentally as an organizer, what programs are you developing to create a framework to address, engage, and mobilize people? Again, when we look at the communities that we grew up in, we live in, we survive in, they're fractured communities. I mean, this would be our 14th year doing it consecutively, but we've done it almost like 18 times overall. And we're just now at a space where we kind of like putting everything back together, creating an opportunity for folks to reconnect with each other again. Because when you look at the landscape of our communities, when I say we're fractured, people have died, people have been, like literally died, or there's folks who have been literally killed, folks who've been in the prison, in or out of prison, county jail, lost jobs. I mean, there's a plethora of different things that has happened in this time period, along with things that are being imposed upon us, that are being snatched from us. And so again, for me to just come on the block and say, hey man, we just need to clean up the block. I'm like, nigga, what you mean clean up the block? Fuck this. This is the mentality that you fighting against, right? All this equipment right here, right? They seeing us bringing it in. They might even help you bring it in, and they looking, okay,
how long before I'm gonna take it out again?
Yeah, exactly, right?
Exactly.
These are the temptation that we deal with, but by engaging them, they can see, or hopefully they can see, like, this is for me. So, cause for every young brother and every young sister, like, oh, we gonna get that nigga. There's one that you can influence. Like, why you gonna do that? Like, Kari for us, or Yusef for us. I mean, that's the testament of the work.
Yeah, and more than that, as we talk about the whole concept of people using the term community home, a resource, and even starting this place, you were like, man, this is the most revolutionary thing you did. And I just thought about it like, okay, I just got sick of paying rent for places, and I had this place next door. I can utilize the space. It didn't really make the same sense to make renters, and it made my mom extremely happy that I was going to take the home that I already inherited from my grandmother, and instead of just having renters in here, create in here. It was the last project we worked on together. But you've had a community house interacting with your mother as well,
right,
for years, and it's reopening and a grand launch this year, 2020. But these places and spaces, as you talk about being in the community and what in the community seeing it as a resource, the neighborhood seeing it as a resource, and also us leading these spaces, what relationship do you have with the neighborhood in opening this space and welcoming them to the space? And then what relationship do you think the neighborhood has with your space as well?
I mean, that's a very profound question. The reason I say it, because like when people look at us, they tend to want to separate us from our neighborhood. They tend to want to, like, Kari the artist, Kari the rapper, Kari the Detroit the Different podcast, Yusef the author, the public speaker, the college graduate. Like, no, nigga, I'm from Zone 8. I just might not, I might not make you feel uncomfortable in that sense, but my hat that I wear first and foremost, I'm from Zone 8. I grew up on Ferry Park Street, 2243 Ferry Park, 2240. Those things are etched in my mind. The ghost of my community, the ghost of my homeboy that got killed on reefer, Scotty Mack, and my homeboy Rocky, who got killed, holding on the shotgun in a drug house at the age of 15. My son, mother, Anki, who got shot with an AK-47 at a park. These are the integral parts of, and those are just the most extreme. Then there's Crockett's, the Crockett store, Miss Penny store, P&J, Joey Crow. Meat Market, Big Daddy, all these fundamental things are part of what shaped, JoJo to Yusef Shakur. That it means everything to me, and so and that's has been my governing body of how I interact and engage my community. Because fundamentally, the people who've been there, they've seen me when I was at my worst, or if they didn't see me, they know my sisters, they know my mother, they know my son. There's somebody that we know each other. There's an intimate interaction that allows us or sparks the potential of a relationship, and then the way we've done the work. So like the community house, we've been a pillar in that line of work. Starting with the urban network, the bookstore, the cafe, which we opened that up in 2009. Ran for 4 years before there was books. Modeled ourselves after what Baba Malik and Yakini and them did with his bookstore that was forced to close, and then turned into a cafe. Which during that time there wasn't a lot of cafes in the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Now it's the new hip thing, and whatnot. So we was a step ahead of the game long before it became this new hip thing, and transitioning into getting the house. We just kind of started off slower than everybody else, but we was already there. And what I mean by slower, like we had to go get the money out the dirt. And what I mean about the dirt, we had to go out and raise it, penny by penny, nickel by nickel, dollar by dollar, to get the money to complete this project that we're in a position to open up. Where other folks they become poster child, they're getting investments from other people, and where they're it's not. It looks like it's community, but is it really community? And so for me, fundamentally, like people when they say community, they want to see a bunch of people. Like our communities are fractured, but at the end of the day, like people in the community, they might not say my name, but they'll tell you they're connected. They're connected in every way possible to everything that we do, because we're connected to the community. I am the community, and the community is me.
That's deep. That's deep. So this part really goes into some of the ideas of what's moving forward, because we spoke a little bit about your mother, that relationship, the roots, the usual Detroit is different, and this is definitely a different interview as you my homeboy, and I really want people to go get your book. So support the brother, patronize him as an author, because it's a great book. And also, along with that, moving forward, the vision for the future. And a lot of that kind of comes, I think, from some of your relationship with your father, as your father's journey in redemption has been so strong. Can you speak a little bit about your father's influence and what's his vision on the work that you're doing right now?
So my mother is my hero, and my father's my mentor. And my mother's my hero in the sense of, like, I survived the streets watching my mother survive. The things that she went through. I was able to endure what I was in my 9 years in prison because of my father, his ability to endure and overcome. And so everything that I am as a man, as an author, as an intellect, is a direct result of my father. I embodied, I attempted to emulate him, and even the things, again, when I didn't know it, like the way I talk, the way I mumble and stutter my word. I mean, it's my father. It's him all day. Like it's just certain things that's just innate in me about my father, and just being around him, it was like giving the stamp of approval. But more importantly, he introduced me to the concept that some of us talk about, which is knowledge of self. Knowledge of self healed me. Knowledge of self challenged me to transform my life. I wouldn't be a transformed, redeemed man if my father had not transformed and redeemed himself. If it was like the prison, I'd still be a gangster, a thug, or let me correct, a wannabe gangster, a thug, a part-time criminal, but a full-time predator. To be a revolutionary, to be the man, the father I am, is a direct result of the relationship that I developed with my father. That was a friend, that was a big brother, that was a comrade, that was my teacher. Now he functions as my not only just my biological father, but my spiritual father as well.
So what's his vision for this work that you're in now, as you're in spaces where you're interacting with people nationally, definitely, and then in some cases internationally on behalf of bringing justice to black people.
So for my father, in terms of him, living through me, and kind of like window shopping that situation. So when I say spiritual father, like we all, when you meet somebody, I remember like sending me a slew of pictures, with Danny Glover, Angela Davis, Bobby Seale, I mean, all these people I'm meeting. And he writes me back and he says, just know that you're just as valuable or not more valuable than them. Because what happens, when we're around those type of individuals, because of the social prestige and status that they have, like we get in awe, which some of them we should be in awe, but we lose the value of our own individual selves and not connecting to others, and that was important. And so for him to transition himself from being my biological father to being my spiritual father, to demand of me to still see my own value and my own worth, as I'm like you they're connecting to you for a reason. You're in those spaces for a reason. It just didn't happen by accident, son. Like you came home to do what you said, which is to be a revolutionary, to live that out. So, and that has allowed me to, garner the respect, garner me the relationships that I've developed, locally, nationally, and internationally.
Okay. All right. So the next questions kind of go to what sparked more of this discussion. As much as you said your father has hipped you to some different readings, I'm sure some of those first readings were book I love, book you love, the autobiography of Malcolm X. And it's a recent documentary on Netflix. A lot of people are talking about it. And
Who killed Malcolm X?
Who killed Malcolm X? And I called you, and I was like, I called you, I called my dad, I called a couple other people, and I was like, you check this out. And I was like, I just want your take. Before I didn't want to paint any picture or anything. I'm like, you check this out. And I definitely want to explore this with you, because I think this will be an interesting discussion with you, especially the role that Malcolm plays in the lives of so many young black men, period. I think that the autobiography of Malcolm X is required reading for any young black male. I think your book is required reading for, especially if you're a black male in the city of Detroit, but Malcolm X just wherever. It's like,
it's the Bible.
You need to read that book.
Yeah, it's a Bible for transformation.
Yeah. But just the identity of, as you talk about the vulnerability, like some of those stories of like, from being like a shoe shine guy. Cause like, you're right. Like most people would never say like, yeah, I was shining shoes to make money. And then one day I hope that I could get into the party where I was shining shoes for the people. Like that's like I can identify with that, but you'd expect most people to be like, you know what I'm saying? I came in, fresh to death,
I was already
Gators
there.
on, and then people knew what was up.
Had the dive,
Yeah, like Jay-Z's story. It's like, man, Jay-Z never, you know what I'm saying?
He never struggled. He been at the top since day one.
Exactly. Whereas, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I can relate to, like, I can see how you could be a shoe shine guy. But first, let's get your take on this documentary. Let's talk about this documentary on Netflix if people haven't watched it. So we're gonna talk a little bit about some of the details. So I guess it could be a spoiler alert. But what's your take on Who Killed Malcolm X?
I mean, to be honest with you, I probably wouldn't have watched it if you hadn't gave me that phone call. I mean, I looked at the trailer. I saw, on the unique thing about social media now is instant gratification. So things are right there even when you may not want to look at it. Watching it, first let me say this. I can listen to Malcolm all day. So I think if you're into Malcolm or if you're not into Malcolm, the nuances of rehearing Malcolm speak is biblical. It's profound. I mean, it's Malcolm in his own words, and that's where I enjoyed it, right? Because I enjoy Malcolm. The question that it raises: Who killed Malcolm X? Like, do you really want to know the answer? I mean, the answer is obvious. It's the American government, the FBI, the CIA, the nation, in the sense of their implicit bias towards the inflammatory things that they said. You know, it's been proven or identified that certain members who was identified pulled the trigger, and that has to be broken up and really examined. Like some individuals, I mean, like, being in the nation, like Malcolm said it once, like he knows that he's probably a dead man, possibly by some people, and I'm paraphrasing him, by people in the nation, because he was like, shoot, if I was me, I'd probably want to kill me, and he meant that in the sense of,
Yes.
because that's how you was trained. You don't go against the messenger, you don't go against the grain, and you was trained to protect and be loyal. But that loyal, what we see now is a level of blind loyalty, and so many if we really dug deep, those individuals who was convicted for his killing, some of them probably was actual members, some of them probably was who have been persuaded, FBI agents. So it was a mixture of different dynamics that played a role in the larger thing. So again, if you're trying to unravel that, then that makes sense. But the question, or not the question, the problem I have with the movie or the documentary, it kind of it's what happened to King. When I mean Martin Luther King. Every year since his birthday became a national holiday, we celebrate his birthday, but we celebrate King separately from black people. King was assassinated for fighting for black people. He was part of the struggle for black people. Same with Malcolm. Malcolm was assassinated because he was struggling for black people. He was struggling for our liberation. So we cannot talk about these two individuals or any other person from a historical figure in that from that cloth without talking fundamentally about black liberation. Malcolm became a threat because he was fighting for the liberation of black people.
Along with that, one of the flaws I had with this documentary was the trust for the FBI documents alone. There was a lot of trust for these FBI records. And I believe that the idea of the historical context and the way the historical context is driven. So this is usually in academics. This is also sometimes in books, which kind of coincide with academics. And some other documentaries, it says this paperwork is true, and we can use this as what happened, and it's beyond reproach. It's beyond reproach because this is what the documents say, which the whole premise of the FBI inherently was to disrupt, disorganize, and compromise and corrupt black organizations and black leadership. Going back to Marcus Garvey and from the inception, we think about why the FBI exists. The FBI exists to target black organizations and to corrupt them. So to trust any documents from the FBI already, especially in that era, and I go as far as to say in this era as well, I'm already trusting in a system that inherently is corrupt and looking to fight against black liberation. So that's one point that definitely disturbed me about the documentary. The other point, as you talk about black liberation, the context of what the Nation of Islam represented is not put into the right framework at the time. And I would go as far as to say the way that it just kind of surmises that, Elijah Muhammad made this religion so he wouldn't have to pay taxes and make a lot of money, and look at him and how he's living, negates the fact of what the Nation of Islam, even to this day, of the restaurants, the stores. And originally, a lot of the restaurants and the stores were directly against, and this is some of the roots of when people say, why is the Nation of Islam so much against Jewish people? A lot of those merchants, a lot of those stores, A lot of the cafes that were taken out of the black community or not as patronized in the black community in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s were Jewish owned businesses that the nation took a lot of that money away from their communities.
Right.
And they offered a new alternative that was black owned.
Right.
You know, one of the few black owned products my granddad that definitely didn't agree with all the nation teachings, but he says, I know from top to bottom when I buy this Muslim newspaper, that's what he say. I know that the printing is black. I know the ink is owned by probably made in a black. You know, he knew from top to bottom every dollar is turning over in the black community when he bought that paper. Even the distribution channel of a guy on the corner selling bean pies with the paper.
Right.
This was my granddad in Cleveland. So something like that in the black community should to surmise it as if it is only intentionality is greed supersedes the role that it played in our community in changing the lives of men like Malcolm X to enlighten them.
Right.
I would argue also that the documentary, the style in which it's shot, and this is where we can use media often, is shot from the perspective as if Malcolm was unaware of the relationship between the NYPD and the FBI and the target he had on his back. When I believe that Malcolm was very keenly aware of that as well.
Right. I think your first point is very, very important. And that's where I question the motives of the documentary. Again, first and foremost, like everything in America is about business.
Yeah.
You know, it's capitalism. It's about profit. We know Netflix they've been giving the bag away to develop content.
Yeah.
And I mean, this was a very potent content, and what we know about black people, we're probably one of the largest consumer bases in the world. And so here Malcolm is whether loved or hated, he would spark an interest. And I would love to evaluate what those numbers been like since that documentary was released. Because again, when you look at a lot of the black films that has come out on Netflix, nothing probably of this magnitude that will really like draw us. So again, from you know, what we learned from the movie Black Panther, you know, worldwide, you know, it was one of the largest, most gross movies ever as a result of black people, not only in America but across the different waters. So, you know, putting it in that context, and then I think the brother who's doing a lot of interviewing, I mean, like what like pissed me off in the last the second or the second from the last episode or the last episode when he said something to the fact that you know, the FBI killed one of his own citizens or some shit like that. And I'm like, you know, they didn't, you know, Malcolm didn't see himself as a citizen. He saw this as a legal government. He saw himself as a oppressed human being that was fighting for his liberation. But again, to your point, like to confuse as if this government loved Malcolm. Like this government killed Martin Luther King. This government killed Fred Hampton. This government killed Patrice Lumumba. Why wouldn't it kill Malcolm X? It not only, you know, it incarcerated Mutulu Shakur. It incarcerated Geronimo Pratt. You know what I mean? The list goes on and on of you know, this government you know, brought crack cocaine into the black community. It's has always and continue to function in a very genocidal way with black people.
Yeah.
And so do we really know this? Two, do we really believe this? Or three, again, we're so blinded with what about W. Du Bois talks about a function in this double consciousness of being black and being America. And as the Bible says, you can't serve two masters. One would trump the other. Fundamentally, being America or thinking that you're America is always going to trump being black. Why? Because we want the full rights of America. I mean, and that's basically what it's like. He's trying to share this red, blue, and white, or red, white, and blue ideology, and
Yeah.
that's in contrast to being black. That we may have that around us, but it's strangling us, it's killing us in
Yeah.
every way. I mean, like when you look at J. Edgar Hoover and what he like you identify, coming out of the Justice Department and what it did in attacking Marcus Garvey
And wait, and when you even say that, let's start. The root of what started the FBI was Marcus Garvey's movement, which a lot of what the Nation of Islam built their foundation from, of knowing that it could be possible.
Absolutely. And then transitioning into the nation.
Yeah.
That's a whole conversation in itself. So like as Professor James Small, who's considered himself like a Malcolmite, he gave the documentary 2 thumbs up. But one of the crucial things that he talked about because there's a wound that's being reopened. I mean that wound was already being reopened through the Bumpy Johnson series. I mean Malcolm, they're like when we was talking about my childhood growing up early, right? When I went to prison, one of my homeboys that helped start Zone 8 with me, he was a Nation. I was part of a group called the Melanics. And he was, unfortunately, most Nation guys, because they've been trained to look at Malcolm as someone who betrayed him. I mean, they love him to a certain degree, but then they'll draw the line. So he betrayed them, the Nation, blah blah blah. And he's talking bad about Malcolm, and I just had enough of it. And I'm like, dude, there's those who love Elijah and would die for him, and there's those who love Malcolm and would die for him, and I'm one of them. And from that day forward, he never said nothing else bad about Malcolm to me, and I felt I just had to do that. And so my point is, like, if we're gonna reopen this wound without taking cautionary, because like Professor Small talked about when you look in the documentary and when they get to New Jersey and they're re-showing clips of I think it's James Sebastian or something.
Yeah.
And he talks about in his interview that's online, and he doesn't go into details, but he was like there was some retaliation, and the retaliation was the guy James Sebastian. He ended up getting killed. He got his head cut off. Mm-hmm. And so I'm saying like that's a touchy subject in our community. It can spark a fire real quick on either side.
And then also when you say either side, back to the elephant in the room of what we're saying, and we're saying either side, but also the FBI can be involved
absolutely
in this as well. So as much as it's hiding behind the guise, as we know that COINTELPRO, what we know of COINTELPRO, act in the Black Panther Party, I'm not one to say COINTELPRO was not intricately involved in the Nation of Islam. COINTELPRO was not intricately involved in everything Martin Luther King was doing. COINTELPRO was not intricately involved in Harold Washington's campaign to be mayor of Chicago and Coleman Young, obviously in the city of Detroit, being mayor here.
But also to your point, to simplify for your audience, when you say COINTELPRO, you're talking about the infiltration of informers.
Yes.
The infiltration of what some people call agent provocateurs, because there was multitude of folks who infiltrated. So like the guy in the what we learned about some of us already knew, but you relearn in this documentary about Gene Roberts. Gene Roberts was a guy that was recruited by the police officer who worked his way up to being one of Malcolm X's top security. He didn't do anything to disrupt or cause harm to Malcolm per se, but he monitored Malcolm. And the difference where in like in Fred Hampton's case, there was a guy named William O'Neill. He not only did he infiltrate, but also he was an agent provocateur, where he poisoned Fred Hampton. So you had these multitude of different things as a result. When you're talking about COINTELPRO, that J. Edgar Hoover or his folks that work for him will hire us, our own, and that's where again, like being black just can't be enough. Because motherfuckers show up talking about black, but they only using that to get to the table. Like, what is your values? What is the principle? What is your commitment? Because just talking black cannot be the standard. What is the vetting process? And that's one of the things. Like I really like I'm gonna sit down and write one day, Is because same thing like with William O'Neill, he became Fred Hampton's top security guy. How do and that's a rhetorical question. How do a guy like this walk off the street, work his way up to be your top security? And then I'll make this point. Gene Roberts, not only did he infiltrate Malcolm organization, a couple years later, he infiltrates the Black Panther Party. So again, we're not learning, we're not creating processes. I mean, even now, in organizing spaces, we have to assume there's a possible agent, but we can't be paranoid in that assumption. I mean, what happens is like a lot of guys who get familiar with COINTELPRO, and they'll quick to say that he's an agent. What we learned from the past, the one who quick to say you're an agent probably is the agent.
Hilarious. But what you're saying is definitely real. And I can just say from the strongest organization I'm connected to would be definitely the Republic of New Africa, which was certainly infiltrated. When we think of Amari Badeli, Gaidi, and all the organization there, but more so, my mentor, Chokwe Lumumba, rest in peace, and all the organization there, and just how to organize with some of the things that I engage and interact with. Like, I don't know. I look at a lot of people and what we need, and so many hands in. It's an extension of Black love to care for whoever walks in the room. That's our people. But definitely, does the value set and does the value system of our people always align with the interest of ourselves? Especially, living in this American scape, living in scarcity. Right. And even if a person is walking line and steps with the people, and then find themselves in a situation where they're behind on rent, or they can use that extra couple dollars. Right. Like most criminals don't know this, I don't think, or at least they don't talk a lot about this, but it's more money, and it almost has always been more money in being an informant and snitching on people than probably committing crimes themselves. So the basis of these systems to find informants, to pay off informants, to offer incentives for informants, stands on the backs and the grounds of exploiting our people for generations. Even when we think of enslavement of our people, and the informants that were on plantations offering information about people planning to escape or planning to coup or to overtake.
And that's where, again, like values are so important. Like, because of the lack of values, we find ourselves in very vulnerable positions. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that, we're all vulnerable in the sense of we don't have enough money to get through, right, to make it through the day. And if you don't have the values, someone will come and say, hey Kari, I'll give you $50,000 if you go do blah blah
plant
blah.
this drugs on
right.
Yusef.
Exactly. and so, and this is where like and this is where like when we talked about earlier, knowledge of self, learning who you are, all the when those things become your core, then you that can't be penetrated. And I think in terms of overstanding like the documentary and the potency of it, I would challenge anybody who, if this is your entry level to learn about Malcolm, don't stop there. Go read the Autobiography of Malcolm X. Go there are some documentaries that's on YouTube. I think one is Make It Plain. It's a couple others that's very authentic, that will add more context. Overstanding like there was some estranged relationship between Malcolm and Elijah, and just in general of the movement and the organization. And if you don't understand those complexities, you'll easy get in the position of picking a side. I love Malcolm, but as my father challenged me, like, you can't love Malcolm without loving Elijah.
Yeah.
And Malcolm is a product of Elijah. Elijah it set the foundation, but the reality at the end, Malcolm outgrew Elijah. He outgrew the Nation of Islam. He was a butterfly, looking to spread his wings, and that led to some conflicts and thinking. And then we put it in the context of our struggle. The organization was still in its infancy stages.
Yeah,
not gonna say real, still developing who it was, what the leadership was, and how they're going to function.
And I actually, on that point, want to get into the church is one of those strong institutions and the nation. So like religion serves, but also organizations themselves. It's always these deep questions about for black organizations. When you're fighting for black justice and black people, what role and responsibility do you have for outside the flock, as the church would say? Because fundamentally, I think that was the divide, and it was pulling more and more on Malcolm, as Malcolm wanted to serve a role more with black people outside of coming into the nation, and many pastors felt the same way, though he's romanticized right now. But many pastors, black pastors, really felt that way about Martin Luther King. You'd be surprised if you really, look back at some of the history and read the sermons. Pastors definitely felt that way about Jeramogi of the Shrine of Black Madonna, where you just spoke not too long ago, about what role do black organizations and institutions play in the lives of people outside of these institutions when the resources are already so scarce by design. And, should our resources of our institution go outside of our institution to support?
I mean, they play a crucial role. They always have, and hopefully always will. But the problem is when the organization positions itself to have the people serve it versus it serve the people, that's when it becomes a problem.
Okay, so let's stop right there, because even in that, some people in the organization sometimes feel that way. So the classic one may be the church. As a church member, I feel that the money for tuition should go to all kids from the church that's going to all children of church members that have been a part of this church. When we send some kids off to college, even though it may be a kid that lives across the street, never walked the doors, never walked into the church, but is a part of the community. How do you? I mean, this is not as linear of a.
So that's what I was going to in terms of so let's unpack. When I say organizations, particularly churches, have positioned themselves to have the people serve them versus they serve the people. And so a lot of times when you join these churches, fraternities, the list goes on and on. First thing they say, "Welcome, brother. You're home. You finally found your family." Like I always had a family. Or always doing. It's not about your set.
Yeah, and in some ways, you could even say that. You can say gang. I mean, a
yeah.
lot of these organizations are living in the same scarcity of black people themselves,
and they function in this very narrow way. And because of our inability or lack of being in leadership, or we don't want to rock the boat, we allow that to be. Again, I remember when I joined Fellowship Chapel Hall with Rundle Anthony, years ago. He was like, "This young brother here, he gonna do like motherfucker." I was already doing. Like I joined to be a part of other things, but when you try to regulate me to just be here, it's doing a disservice to what I believe. And that's when you look at Malcolm. Malcolm loved black people ultimately more than he loved the nation.
I agree.
And not saying, and again, let's unpack that. He loved the nation. He didn't want to lead the nation, but his love for the nation was a result of his love for black people. It was a result for his love for black people that put him in opposition with Elijah Muhammad. Was his father. He wasn't his biological. He was his spiritual father. He was the man that became an example to him, and that led to the conflict. And so fundamentally, we all have to question ourselves. I mean, again, organizations they exist, but if you're saying if everything that is for the people, but the people have to join your organization, it's bullshit. I mean, that's what made the Black Panther Party so significant, because they at one point in time. It was truly about all the slogans that we hear. They lived it. Power to the people, all for the people. They helped instrument that practice that was so beautiful in that short period of time.
And that was a different form of organizing, even than what one of the people in theory that I look up to. I never met the man, but I like a lot of Stokely Carmichael's theories and what he would speak on. But it was enacted to another level. But when we think of the food program, It wasn't like
The breakfast program.
The breakfast program. It wasn't like is your mom a member of the Black Panther Party? Well, you know, you can get.
I mean, let me share. So, like Fred Hampton, he shares this story, which was the police would come up to the people, particularly to the mothers, and they would try to scare them. Like, this is a communist program. I mean, because at that time, the worst thing you could do was be a communist.
Well, to me, that was the lens that J. Edgar Hoover put on a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, that was the American government. That was how they. That was their narrative, right?
Yeah.
And the mothers, they were like, well, I ain't for communists, but if you stop this program, I'm gonna shoot your ass. Because fundamentally, the program was meeting the needs of the people. So what really resonated with me when I began to study about the Black Panther Party, it wasn't an emphasis about being a leader. It wasn't an emphasis about being an educator. It wasn't an emphasis about being an intellectual. It was an emphasis about being a servant of the people. If you could be an intellectual, but you're using your intellectual capacity to serve the people. You can be an educator. You're using your knowledge and your education to serve the people. You can be a leader, but your servitude of your leadership is to serve the people, not for them to serve you. And if you're not doing those things, you're being a disservice and an injustice to our people. And so when you put those things in the context, to that documentary, like, I don't think most people realize, or when you watch the documentary, many of the guys that he interviewed, the older gentlemen, right? Mm-hmm. It says former member of the Nation of Islam.
Everybody. He did not interview one current member of the Nation of Islam, which, as just a person in the world, a documentarian or videographer, it would be hard for me to release that type of documentary about so much of the Nation of Islam without a current member.
So that's one point. But my point is, if everybody's a former member, why do they become former members? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's, as a critical thinker, that's the first thing coming to my mind. And not only did they stop being members of the nation, they all was now new members of a Muslim mosque, a Sunni Muslim. Mm-hmm. So again, when we study the history of the Nation of Islam, the Nation of Islam was basically, in my opinion, was a Christian type organization. Mm-hmm. They, in all honesty, at one point they relied more on the Bible than they did the Quran. Mm-hmm. And so again, let me explain this to the audience of people that get it. When I say it was more like a Christian organization, they used the biblical language that our people understood to be able to recruit them and to bringing them into the Nation of Islam. But they was not the traditional Islam group. They was not the traditional same as a Sunni Muslim. Even to this day, there's still some difference. Farrakhan, up under his leadership, they made some modifications. But again, so when you look at many of those brothers in that interview, all of them currently are Sunni Muslims who left the Nation of Islam at some point for some reason. And the question, I would love that. Why are you no longer a member? And not saying they had to continue to be a member. Again, and it's so much to unpack. But Malcolm gives us an opportunity, when I mean Malcolm's life, to unpack all these things, because there is no absolute. No absolute is to continue our journey for fighting for our people, but it's disturbing, like some of the things, because ultimately, like, those guys' loyalty was not to justice. Those guys' loyalty was not to trying to find the truth. Like in the last segment, when the one guy who was a friend of the William Bradley, whatever, and his son was like, it's in the past. Let's let it die. Mm-hmm. Like, are you serious?
And I don't think he was even in the nation, but he was like an ex-police officer.
Yeah, I mean, it was the coldness, yes, of what they said and those things. So, it's just so much to unpack within that documentary, and I keep going back to it. Like I just question the motives. I mean, I think you alluded to it, because what happens? I mean, because even when we are such a fragile people, right? So before this documentary comes out, there's the Snoop and Gayle thing. We're fighting back and forth. I mean, if you go on social media, black people fighting every day around something.
I give you that.
I mean, this is another thing to create. I mean, the week before, it was the Tyler Perry movie. There was the Side of Folks Forward side. I mean, it's like every hour there's a new thing, and so my point is, like there's an author named Dale Jones. He's no longer with us. He said the confusion of he said the enemy of revolution is confusion, and this documentary can be that new form of confusion that just drops in the black community that could create some more infighting.
That's deep. That's deep. The one question I do have for you within the group is just posing the question. You say that value systems need to be aligned, but when you engage the people, it's no telling what value systems they have. So under the guise of a group or an organization, it's more an agreed upon value system that exists there. So without the group or the organization, how do you align people's value systems?
I mean, there's some things that's innate, right? We talk about we know what's right, what's from right from wrong. We know what loyalty is. We desire, but because of our inability to see it in a healthy way, right? We have many unhealthy practices of love, unhealthy practices of value systems, but they're there. And so if we can change that unhealthiness to healthy, I mean, like when you look at Malcolm, again, that's what made Malcolm so profound. Like here was a guy that Elijah cleaned up. I mean, a bit of his life was exaggerated. What I mean by a bit in terms of like he wasn't like a bona fide gangster. He flirted with gangsters. He wasn't a bona fide pimp,
But
right?
That's what makes the autobiography a better read too, because the crimes he was committing or what's labeled as crimes, but the acts he was, the criminal acts in America that he was committing are not to the point of like, I mean, he wasn't, Billy the Kid.
Yeah,
he wasn't like heisting trains and running in banks and stuff like that.
He was a criminal.
It was more like a hustler to me of coming up on money.
Absolutely, he was a criminal without a doubt. And I'm not even referring to the documentary per se. I mean the book. Because, again, if you read the book, people get to the conclusion that you're making. But because of what we look at from the outside in, like, people say Detroit Red.
Yeah.
Like, that was just a nickname he got.
Yeah.
Because, again, most people, when you say, where you from, I'd rather say I'm from Detroit than Lansing.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, because when you say I'm Lansing, I'm from Lansing, they like, where is that at?
Right,
Near
exactly.
Detroit?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, to this day, really, you could be from Grand Rapids, depending upon where you at in the country, especially dealing with black folks. They're going to be like, where is that at?
Yeah, and then also you got Red Fox, and he's
Chicago Red.
Right, Red Fox. I mean, so it was easy to develop those names.
Yeah.
But it's, again, we have to really push ourselves to really get to the truth, and that's where you look at Malcolm. Malcolm was such a vivid reader.
Mm-hmm.
He said his books was his automata. So we just had to continue to learn and study, and so asking the right questions, and understanding that, like, where does the Nation fit in, the Nation Islam fit in this? Like, again, let's go back like to the Million Man March. You have more non-nation members who attended all of those events.
Yeah.
Why? Because most, like in your grandfather, right? You said he wasn't a nation, but there was something about that message resonated with them. Because what resonated with them, I'm a black man in America that could possibly get killed. The things that they're saying is relevant to me, right? But I don't necessarily agree with such and such.
Yeah.
And so this is where the problem within the black community, or we create the problem. So you have a Black Panther Party, you have a Nation Islam, you have a Republican New Africa. I mean, there's multitude of different organizations. So if the Nation may not be your cup of tea, the Black Panther Party might be your cup of tea. If the Black Panther Party, it may be SNCC. There's a multitude of organizations. But what we didn't do, and what we still haven't done, was create an umbrella. And because if you're going to be a part of any of these organizations, what are very crucial about all of them, which should be the transformation of yourself, which gets to your other point of the core values. Your values to yourself, your values to your community, which is the value of love for black people, desire for liberation. You also talk about economic self-determination, all these things that we lack in our community. Because, again, when you unpack any of these organizations, their blueprints pretty much are the same. Mm-hmm. But, again, because of what we know about human beings and what we know specifically about men, our fucking egos get in the way. And that's where because of our ego, this is what allows COINTELPRO to come in
To exist.
and to exist and pick us off. And now creates the infighting where I may shoot you, but in reality, J. Edgar Hoover planted the seed.
Yes, very much so. We've seen it play out in, you know how much I love sports, but even sports infighting, like of the tragedy in Kobe Bryant's passing. And I wasn't even the biggest fan of the Lakers at the time. I was way more Allen Iverson fan. But I think to myself, if it wasn't for the infighting between outside interest and really media playing a role, Shaq and Kobe may have won like 10 championships straight.
Right.
Because of ego. You know, and I mean, that's a sports reference for people to take and more so comprehend and hear. But in all facets, as we talk about this divide, and I would say that the idea of the monetary scarcity that capitalism is based upon and definitely infiltrated into our communities creates an opportunity for the susceptibility for so many people to be paid off, so many people to be taken advantage of and exploited because of this opportunity.
And I would just add to your point, not only capitalism is not only an economic system, but it is a lifestyle system.
Yeah.
It is a value system.
True.
And what I mean that for your audience is like capitalism breeds individuality.
It sure does.
And I mean, and to the point of where like if you and I start something, I have to emphasize I'm the founder. I'm the founder. Detroit is different, which you are, right? But if you're trying to recruit other motherfuckers, and all you gonna hear, I'm the founder. Like, what the fuck you need me for? Like that's where part again. That's where the as a lifestyle, as a value system, it begins to show up. It doesn't allow room to incorporate other people. Not to say that you diminish your contribution, diminish your worth. All that matters, right? Because we're still human. We should still engage each other, uplift us, but we should do it with where the individual, the parts are not greater than the whole.
I agree with you, and that individuality can take over. That ego can take over. It's alluring to be exalted, but in reference to like Detroit is different. The way I look at it is so much of anyone else to play a role to shine a light. I look at it as it's a prism. I've used this analogy before. And the light shines through me in a different way than it'll shine through you. So when the light shines through me, it's going to connect some different people. And that's what I love about podcasting so much. Some of these podcasts may only get 50 listens. Some may get 500 listens.
Right.
But those 50 that listen, it's very intentional. Because I'm not necessarily trying to reach. I feel things get more diluted when you're reaching –
absolutely
600 million, because 600 million people may not get to a one premise, but that 50 people where it can be impactful, that's dope that I got something that they can connect with.
And then when you take that and you expand it back into the movement, when any of our organizations, the ones that grew too fast, they met their doom quicker.
Yeah.
I mean, even with the nation, even though they've had more longevity, but it's because of their ability to work more in the small group of who they are, right? But they've suffered many setbacks, many infiltrations, but they're not as open to the larger community in the same way the Black Panther Party was.
It takes it definitely, or what Marcus Garvey had, one of the most infiltrated organizations, but one of the largest organizations ever. Like,
and when I'm choosing my words, carefully, because I don't want to. As I'm saying anything bad about the nation per se, because not just say there's a narrowness to them, and that narrowness is good and it's bad too. It's a both.
I mean, it's an opportunity cost to whatever, but it takes amount of discipline. It takes amount of training. Like being in a nation is not like, you can walk in most churches. Join that Sunday. I mean, it's they're calling you to join. Whereas the nation, that is not the get down with the nation.
Yeah, I mean, and so to again go to that point where like there's a process. Like you just don't walk in and walk off the street and join. But then there's the process too. Like and these things are universal with the nation, with the churches, and even just any organization for the most part. Like, hey, can I get some help? Some will help you for the most part. They want you to jump through hoops. You got to sign up to this, or you got to become a member. Like, what you mean I can become a member? I mean, that part of the narrowness where it turns people off. Even the language, when the nation was very strong with the language of white devils. I mean, I don't think a lot of the black people really resonate. It resonated in private, but publicly, it just because it just went against our nature. Like we're just such a spiritual people. We just love every fucking body, even the motherfucker who shitted on us. Right? It just like hey, it's love them. But some of us like okay, I could see that, but I still don't want to agree with that, right?
Yeah.
And all again, and all these are complexities of being black, because fundamentally we're still a young nation. We are a nation within a nation, still redefining who we are. And the Nation of Islam was just one component of that, and Malcolm is a piece of that, because for the growth of the nation to reach its level that it did, it was a direct result of Malcolm.
I think beyond direct result of Malcolm, and it talks a little bit about the relationship, but I feel that Malcolm was the gateway to so many, but Malcolm was the gateway to Muhammad Ali. Yeah. And Muhammad Ali became a gateway to the world.
Yeah, exactly.
But you take away Malcolm,
you don't get
Muhammad Ali.
You take away Malcolm, you don't get Farrakhan.
That too. Yeah.
I mean, some people say that's blasphemy, but that's true. I mean, Malcolm. I mean, he was in Boston. He Farrakhan heard Malcolm. He loved both. Ultimately, but what we're saying and what I'm saying specifically again, Malcolm love for the nation and for black people demanded of him to work on behalf of that organization. The Muhammad Speak. He started in his fucking basement.
Yeah.
He went up the East Coast corridor, opening up new fucking mosques.
Yeah.
I mean, he slept, he ate, he shitted the nation. He put the nation before. Again, I mean, this is what he and we all should do that. If whatever organization that you join, it should demand of that. But also, what we need to learn too, that it cannot just be narrow for that organization. It has to be for black people first and foremost. Because when Malcolm died, he had nothing.
Mm-hmm.
His children. So I mean, okay, if we depart and we have a breakup, whatever, I should be able to leave with something. I mean, like I make a joke. Me and my ex-wife, when we had the divorce, I had bought her a dog before we got a divorce, and she didn't want the dog no more. And I'm a dog lover, but I didn't really care for this dog. But I didn't want to see it go to a humane society, so I took the dog, and I let her have the house.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and the reason I let her have the house, she got 3 kids.
Mm-hmm.
She needed it. I need a house, but when I compared the two of us, I could see her. It benefited her more than me and where I was at. So I use that point to just illustrate, like Malcolm, he was married. He had 4 fucking children, or 2 on the way, 2 there, 2 on the way. So at least you could have done was give this man something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because of his loyalty, because of his devotion, and it's hard, right? Because at the end of the day, we're still human beings that are tied into our emotions.
And then so much of it also in organization, and this goes right back to ego. Some of it may be you want to act in a certain way, but in acting in that certain way that's out of the line of what other people a part of this organization may say.
Right.
Like classic when I think of the Panther Party and Eldridge Cleaver's role and how certain people felt and how certain people didn't feel. And on a lot of ways, it's like, man, this is a very dynamic situation, because on one hand, what response are we supposed to have to this? And then on another hand, it's like responding in too visceral, as you say, the infighting. Mm-hmm. If we respond with too much of the infighting, then that's only going to trigger other responses and not necessarily be the equity, not necessarily be the semblance of what I think is togetherness. I don't think we culturally exist in the idea of scarcity. I don't think we subscribe to that belief as black people. But being here,
I mean, and just to bring the conversation back full circle around the documentary, I can't emphasize enough, if you're going to allow that documentary to be your entry point to learn about Malcolm and his assassination, in all estimation, you're doing a disservice to Malcolm. You're doing a disservice to yourself if you're not willing to just use it as a stepping stone So if you haven't read it, go back and read. Go read his autobiography. Actually, there's a book out there, particularly if you're more interested in learning about the assassination. It's called a book called The Judas Factory: The Plot to Kill Malcolm X. That's one of the very very good prolific books. There's some good documentaries on YouTube. Like I said, one is Make It Plain.
Malcolm speaks, and then listen to his speeches.
Yeah.
I mean, one of his last speeches was here, recorded by Gaidi Obadeli, right here in the city of Detroit at Ford Auditorium. So, like, you have access to his direct message as well on YouTube. So connect to those direct messages, because you'll be surprised some of the poignancy and how current a lot of his speeches still are to this day.
I mean, because also before he got assassinated, I mean, they were so intertwined in the internal beef between him and the nation. Like, he was saying inflammatory things, they were saying inflammatory things, and then when he goes, I think it was Paris or somewhere in the Europe country, and they denied him interest, and Malcolm said, "Wow, this is bigger than the nation." Or the time when he goes when he's over in Africa somewhere, or the Middle East, and he gets poisoned. Like, wow, this is bigger than the nation. Like, the nation doesn't have this reach, and whatnot. So, I mean, then again, the people on the side who said they believe Malcolm betrayed, whatever, like, go back, and when the FBI comes knock on Malcolm's door, he let them in, and he secretly records the conversation. That's public knowledge, right? You know, and he plays them, and they're like, and they're trying to, again, vulnerability. You know, he's in a very vulnerable spot. But I mean, they go back to values and he was a very principled individual. But also that doesn't get talked about a lot, and that the time that Malcolm gets suspended, he does his 90 days or whatnot of not being able to talk publicly, and then when he finally breaks or get put out of the Nation of Islam, from that moment to his assassination is very immense intensity of his life. The very pressured days.
Yeah, the firebombing of his home.
Yeah, pressured days, pressured nights. I mean, I wouldn't even want to be in his shoes. Yeah. Right? And he's living. I mean, he's on borrowed time. He's on borrowed time. I mean, we're so quick to always look like our ancestors that was enslaved. Like, I would have did such and such. Well, nigga, why you ain't doing it right now? Because we still enslaved in some type of way. And so we can't be so quick to make judgment statements without fully comprehending the historical ramifications that created the situation in the first place. Because, again, pressure busts pipes. Oppression drives us insane. Like, Malcolm made many mistakes during that time. But a lot of those mistakes was based on, I mean, he was one man fighting against many.
Well, that, and also at the time, I can try to empathize with him. I mean, what he was fighting against and the reasoning behind what he was fighting against, he really did not like. It's different when you're confused. When you're confused about, a disconnect, a separation, and you feel just for your actions. It's different. Like, if you still, if you forget to wash the dishes and you get in trouble, that's different than, like, you didn't do. It's like, Mom, why am I in trouble?
Right.
Like, what did I do? And furthermore, when you rethink and you retrace your steps and you say to yourself, I would have did the same thing over and over and over again. So that's definitely a different state. But it in reading the autobiography, you get a peek into some of his thoughts around this time. But and really, during the time of the autobiography is like really when he's in this zone. Like, he's speaking in actuality of present in the autobiography.
And he's going. The duality of that experience is, not only is he sharing it with Alex Haley, he's living it.
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah,
it's like, right.
Yeah, he's living
now.
It. I mean, before they complete the book, the split happens. He's going through that. He's still making time to talk to Alex Haley when God knows what's going on. He's still traveling the country. He's feeling the obligation. So, I mean, their lives is the blueprint to complete the journey of our goal to seize liberation for Black people.
And that is what's so like I can only imagine, because to stay tried and true, and yes, there were inflammatory things that Malcolm was saying, and vice versa. Not necessarily Elijah Muhammad as much as some of the other ministers in the nation.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things. Like looking at the documentary, I mean, he quoted Malcolm. I mean, Elijah. He said some. He said some.
Yeah, he did.
He didn't say nothing. I mean, like Farrakhan and a few others. No, they said they was doing cocktails. They was
yeah. But it's still But even Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, I mean, like each of these guys he had personal relationships with, right?
Yes.
And so in each one who's basically turning their back on him, can you imagine the pain, the blow? Like we ain't even gonna talk about Farrakhan. We gonna stick with Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali fundamentally does not become a member of the Nation of Islam if it wasn't for Malcolm.
Yeah,
without question.
Yeah,
and they created that rift. I mean, to the point where he publicly disowned Malcolm.
Yes. Yeah. It is, and that would drive you crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, the closest thing to that within my own life was Tupac. And I remember that Vibe article about everything that happened, between being shot at Quad Studios between Tupac and Biggie. And I don't know how many people follow hip hop. I know you follow Tupac a whole lot, but it's the same way. And I mean, also just like Malcolm was very young like Tupac too, because it's also, you're young trying to comprehend a lot of this and unpack it. I think if you get older, you may have more context to say, okay, I can see where ego plays. I can see where roles play. I can see where organization plays. But being young and going through all of that,
I mean, not only be young, but to have a target on your back.
Yeah.
To literally have someone try to kill you or assault you. I mean, and that's a great example. Like those from the time Pac got out of the joint to the time he was assassinated and killed. Him and both their lives are very similar in terms of the amount
the
of
emotions,
pressure, the emotion tied to the pressure that they're dealing with. I mean, even like when I think about, I do think now, like with Biggie, right, the way he went at Biggie, I think a lot of it was tied to other things. I think there was some stuff between him and Biggie.
It was, but at the same time, Biggie and Puffy. I remember like yesterday, the whole when they came on Yo MTV Raps, and we're like, man, we hope Pac is good and everything like that. And then 2 weeks later, they come out with Who Shot You?
Yeah,
like yeah. Pac's 22 at the time.
Yeah.
A 22-year-old being shot.
And that's what I'm saying.
And then a song like Who Shot You come out. I don't think you have the layers to say, oh, maybe he just. I mean,
right. No, I feel that, and that's what I'm trying to like. On one hand, I try to. I'm in retrospect trying to get Biggie a pass a little bit. Then like when the Who Shot You, like damn for real. Like and that's that. If that probably for Pac hurt it more than the actual bullet.
Yes,
and
because you're in jail, and it's like, hey, you heard this new Biggie song, and it's like, what? What in the like? Am I tripping?
Yeah, you supposed to be my man's.
Yeah,
you broke bread together.
Like, am I tripping or am I tripping?
And I think, and in both their lives, it helps us to understand like the depths of betrayal.
Yes.
Like we all have been to some level, but not to that level, right? And that's where it cuts cuts deeper than a razor blade. And it can bring the worst out you, right? I mean, and Pac was very young. I mean, Malcolm was 39, but he was very young in the sense of a movement. He's a movement person. And he's trying to develop a movement. And I mean, he's trying, and like I relate to Malcolm in the sense of like I haven't been so quick to get out and try to start an organization, do shit like that when I can. Like if I wanted thousands of followers, I could have that. Not because I wanted to, because the world that we live in, people flock to what they think as leaders or people who have information or doing some shit. People just want to be a part of that. It's the P. Diddy effect. It's the Damon Dash effect, if you want it. But that shit scares the hell out of me. It scares me in a sense because at the end of the day, the worst thing I can do is fuck over somebody's hope. The worst thing I could do is lead somebody into a ditch. I need to make sure that I'm developed enough to create a situation that we all function as leaders and organizers, and not to deny my own leadership accountability, but that's how that grows out. So again, thinking about Malcolm trying to start a Muslim mosque, trying to start the OAU, even Pop. No, he goes through now he has the Outlaws. I mean, all these are kids in the Outlaws.
Yeah.
That and he's still a kid his own fucking self.
Yeah.
That he's trying to help develop and raise, and just deviating on the Pac thing. But you just saw like he changed the complexity of Death Row in terms of like we know Snoop when he was the man. When Pac comes, he knocks Snoop's out the way. Where the Dog Pound and Snoop niggas LBC, they looking at Pac. Pac setting the tone because he just came from a different breed. And that same with Malcolm. Malcolm, people not like when you look at after the assassination of Malcolm X, and all the organization that was started after 65 was influenced by Malcolm X.
Very much so. Very much so.
You know, so not to deviate the conversation to Pop, but they are interconnected, yes. and to help to illustrate points around the pressure, around being young, being isolated. It leaves you because again, Pop. I think he gets overly criticized. I mean, he definitely deserves some of the criticism,
yeah.
But we don't put it in context. Same with Malcolm. He gets overly criticized. He doesn't put it in context because we unfortunately intellectually we become lazy. We don't want to really dig deep.
Yeah, it's easier to stay on the surface.
Exactly.
And with staying on the surface, we lose, like you say, the context of how. And as we come to a close, I want to introduce some of the work that you're doing now. Mm-hmm. You got on a hoodie.
Yeah.
What you rocking?
Rocking Community Movement Builders.
What's that?
Community Movement Builders is an organization that I'm part of. I'm the national field marshal. We started off in Atlanta, Georgia. We have 4 chapters now. We have a chapter in Dallas. We have a chapter in San Diego. We have a chapter in Detroit. You know, we be launching the Detroit chapter this year for show. Community Movement Builder is a place-based organization where we do institution building in terms of rooting ourselves in the neighborhoods, in the community as neighborhood organizers. We're developing the concept around liberated zones, but our theory around liberated zones is practically tied to institutions, such as where we at now. Being able to organize and engage the people.
Okay. All right. What led you to be a part of that?
What led me to be a part of it? Values first and foremost. Our values are Black sustainability, Black self-determination, Black love, Black liberation, and as I just talked about earlier, I can talk about all the great shit I've done as an individual. Mm-hmm. But fundamentally, I'd rather talk about all the great shit that we can do collectively.
I like it.
Yeah.
And back to Malcolm's legacy in this, you're going to be doing something big coming up. Mm-hmm. What's coming up?
So we got the grand opening for the community center. It will be May 16th. And then the following weekend, we'll be doing actually May 19th, we'll be doing something around Malcolm X's birthday. We'll have Eddie Conway, a former Black Panther Party member who served 45 years. He'll be coming from Baltimore, having a conversation with him. We can come back, talk more about that. And then May 23rd, we'll bring a Stickman in from Atlanta, who's part of the phenomenal rap group Dead Prez. We'll be hosting him at the community center. And then August 1st, we'll be hosting our 14th year annual backpack event, and this year we're still in the early stage of pushing that out to make that a national, international day of organizing.
Okay, if people want to support you, how do they go about it?
So right now, for the next 30 days, I'll be off Facebook. People can go to the website YusefBunchyShakur.org. Again, that's YusefShakur.org. Or people can reach out to me directly at 313 313-459-6008, 313-459-6008.
And that's like his real number. That ain't a Google Voice number. That ain't like his ghost phone. Yeah, that's not no assistant. That's like Yusef's real number. He may click over and be talking to his son, his mama, his sister.
True that, man. I come from a different cloth, so.
Yep.
And then also for Detroit, man, we also in the early stage of looking to. So again, we've been doing the backpack event for 14 years. I think we've had an influence of people taking that model and doing it. So this year, what we want to do is for the whole month of August, we want to do a backpack event every weekend. But what I want to do is like not going to anybody's community and trying to do it, helping people and giving them the instrument and the tools how to do it, and we support it. And it doesn't all have to be the same. It doesn't have to be a big, miraculous type of event. It can be small, as long as it's something and we're tied together and we're building the movement. And then also, part of CMB, we'll be launching the third Space Collective as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I ran to Lauren Hood the other day, so she's all with it and stuff. So then just again bring the conversation back full circle and I was talking about you, and I was like, man, I don't use the F word that often, which is like friend. Like he's like Kari's the closest thing. When I say like that's my friend, and because again when you live in this world, man, and for me and everything I've been through, like we talked about having friends, but when you grow up and you realize like every motherfucker ain't your friend. It's a different meaning. So when I say that to you, like I know, like dude, like we friends, we brothers, we friends, we all that.
Yeah, me casa, su casa. Because when you say F word, I'm like, well, you say fuck a lot. I don't know. I speak. Detroit is different. I definitely keep it clean. But in common conversation, I'm colorful with profanity. So you meet me in common conversation. But I know I got a lot of my older guests and stuff. But that is what it is. Sometimes it gets coarse like that. Y'all done heard the word before. If you older than me, it was around. Y'all probably use profanity I never heard of. Like
right.
rutabaga, something. I ain't no telling with old folks. But man, this was fun. I'm going to definitely bring you back. We're going to keep this community development discussion going. And that's dope that you got Lauren Hood. I think Lauren is very brilliant with how she frames things and the role she's going to play. I feel in a lot of ways, even more as my homie and friend, I look at Lauren like, man, I wish I had a fast forward button in life because I want to see what she's going to be doing for our community like 20 years from now. Because I do think she interacts dope. And she connects with organizations and certain people to bring back resources that I definitely don't think, people like me and you will ever be privy to. But she is in a space where she knows a role that she can play in the lives of me, you, Malik Yakini, and so many others too.
And I think just as we get ready to close and bringing up Lauren, one of the things I love about Lauren and really respect is like when we think about fighting for black people, it's like as a monolith. Like you fight in your own way, I fight in my own way. But being able to it's like this Rubik's Cube. How do we find the pieces where we function? I think Lauren she exhibits. Like she didn't necessarily start out like you and I learning, but she's learning, she's growing, she's committed, she's finding her own voice, and she's willing to connect those dots. And not too many of us are willing to do that. Like we want the fast route to get to the top of fighting for black people, which is not very authentic at all.
True, I agree, man. Peace be. I don't know if you want to say peace, shout out.
All power to the people, man.
I like that.
All power to the people.
That's like the old saying.
What up, though?
All right, peace.
Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.